Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing really well, and tell me how cold you are in your part of the world, because some of you are having freezing temperatures. So keep yourself lovely and warm and go and get a lovely hot cup of cocoa, and whatever it is that you drink, let me know about it, because I love hearing from you. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Mrs. Nettles lived next door to me in an old cottage-style home in a green leafy rural neighbourhood outside of Portland. She was in her late 80s, but was a sprightly, energetic woman that had been fit as a fiddle for as long as I'd known her. Over the years I'd waved at her over the fence in our backyard as she attended to her phenomenal rose garden. She would always wave to me joyfully with a full straw hat on her head and a pair of secateurs in her hand. We would engage in a few words together over the fence. "Lovely day, isn't it, dear?" she'd say to me. "I love getting out into the fresh air, especially on a fine day like this." Mrs. Nettles knew how to grow roses like no one I'd ever known, and she had hundreds of different roses clustered together in her yard, in purples, creams, pinks, violets, yellows, and believe it or not, she grew some black roses that were surprisingly really rather magnificent. I remember when she first handed me a few black roses, she watched my expression change from astonishment to delight. "They're black!" I'd exclaimed, "but they're so beautiful." "Don't be so surprised, dear," she had said. "Haven't you noticed that many stunning butterflies have black in their wings? It only serves to enhance their vibrant colours. And what about evening dresses and cocktail gowns? They look incredibly elegant in black." For a moment I'd reflected on Mrs. Nettles' words. "You're right," I said. "I often gravitate towards black for smart evening wear. I guess I've never considered you could get black roses before. But they're magnificent. Well, think about the night sky. If it wasn't black, the moon and the stars would not look nearly as scintillating." "Now there's a thought, Mrs. Nettles. You're 1,000% right about that. Those silvery stars would not be pronounced or conspicuous without a contrasting velvety black sky, would they?" "My point exactly," said Mrs. Nettles. "Think about all those black evening gowns with rhinestone jewels. They look amazing." Mrs. Nettles would regularly pop over to my house with a huge bunch of colourful roses for me every time, and often one of her homemade apple crumble pies that she was famous for making in our neighbourhood. I think she cooked the apples in a caramel sauce, which made it delectable. There are no words to describe how delicious it was. Mrs. Nettles had recently fractured her ankle while out doing gardening in the backyard. Since her nasty fortuitous fall, she was getting increasingly frail, so I tried to pop around to her house regularly whenever I could offer her a helping hand. After all, I lived next door. It was the least I could do in the circumstances. We lived in a fabulously leafy green neighbourhood, on a street with decently spaced back and front yards, with individualistic homes, most usually ranch style, that were close enough that people were on first-name terms with each other. Some of the properties were significantly bigger, where the owners may have had a stable block and kept one or two horses in a meadow at the back of their property. It was a congenial, companionable neighbourhood. Everyone knew each other, but you really felt that you were living in a rural, rustic community, where the air was so fresh. There was an abundance of trees and still more trees everywhere that you looked. It was not uncommon to see riders trotting down our street, to the bottom of our road, where a fabulous open clearing sprawled out into a plethora of woodland riding and hiking trails, pretty flowering meadows, fields of sagebrush, gravel pits, and an abundance of rocky outcrops. It was a spectacular, magical place, where many of the local residents would go for walks, sometimes on their own, other times with their dogs. It was in this tranquil nirvana that you forgot about your neighbourhood, only minutes away. As in this transfixing sanctuary, you felt as if you were in the middle of nowhere, alone with the sounds of birdsong, the sounds of moving water, The pièce de résistance being, of course, an exquisite waterfall, where you could watch ribbons of white water bounding down the precipitous rocky outcrops, where mesmerizing white foaming bubbles would fold into the rock pools below, and zigzagged through its long course into the lower valley, until finally it amalgamated in a broad roaring stream, a quintessential favourite spot for fishing for many of the locals. Many in our neighbourhood, if they had a really bad day, they would naturally gravitate towards this waterfall. They'd sit on the embankment, sipping the sensational views, rather like drinking a glass of effervescent bubbling champagne. It had the same uplifting effects, with none of the side effects, for when they left this treasured oasis, it was like they abandoned their depression that had previously entwined their hearts with a bleak outlook. They returned home with a spring in their step and a smile upon their face. And, of course, nature herself had worked her magical medicine. Mrs. Nettles had given me a key to her front door, so I could always walk into her house unannounced. But I liked to cordially tap on the window to let her know that I was coming inside to her house. On this particular occasion, I didn't open the front door, but went through to the back, as she always had a habit of leaving her kitchen door unlocked, even late at night, as our neighbourhood was considered very safe. "Mrs. Nettles, it's me! Mrs. Nettles, it's me! I'm coming in now," I said, pushing open the kitchen door. Mrs. Nettles was sitting at her kitchen table, with a cup of what looked like over-cold tea in her hands. Her view from the kitchen window overlooked her prized rose garden. On this occasion she sat there frozen to the spot, like a mannequin doll, her unblinking eyes almost glazed over like a dead fish. I'm not going to lie to you. For one horrifying fleeting second, I thought Mrs. Nettles was dead. She didn't flinch, until I saw a lonely, isolated tear trail slowly down her pale white cheek. "Mrs. Nettles, are you all right?" I said, looking alarmed. I reached out for a tissue in the box and handed her one, which she took gratefully and bashfully wiped a tear away. "You scared me there for a moment, Mrs. Nettles. You were sitting there so still. Why are you so upset? Is everything all right?" "Oh, don't mind me, Lisa. You know me. I always overreact." "Renee Nettles, look at me. Nice try. You don't fool me for a single moment. I've never known you to ever overreact a day in your life. You, my dear, are one of the most level-headed people I've ever met. So tell me, why are you so upset? Is it your ankle? It's not giving you pain, is it?" "Oh, no, dear. Nothing like that. It was my son Jonathan. He popped over last night. He had words with me. Words I didn't want to hear." "Really? That sounds ominous. What about?" "He thinks I should sell up and move away into an old age home. He keeps reminding me that I'm not getting any younger. And with this ankle injury, he keeps pointing out my inability to move around efficiently." "That's very nice of him to point that out to you. From where I'm standing, despite your recent injury, you're as fit as a fiddle. Slower, perhaps, after you took that nasty tumble, but as sprightly as ever." "Well, he's right. I have slowed down considerably, haven't I? It takes me twice as long to do everything. The shopping is a complete nightmare these days. Then cleaning the house, well, that's almost a non-starter. And as for the yard, I can't attend to the roses as frequently as I would like. It's really getting me down. I don't mind admitting it." "But you can still move around easily, can you not?" "Of course, but—" "No buts, Rona. We help each other around here. I'm quite happy to do your shopping for you, help cook you a few meals, clean your house. My 3 sons will be able to help you with the roses in your backyard and the mowing of your lawn. You just tell them what to do and they'll do it. My boys are pretty handy with a trowel and a pair of secateurs, I'll have you know. I have them well trained. But I can't possibly ask you to stick your neck out for me like that." "Why not, Rona? If the boot were on the other foot, you know you would do the very same for me. I know you love your home, and you want to stay here for as long as you can, and we'll do everything in our power to make that happen for you. You're not incapacitated, so there's no reason why you can't live here like you always have done. Being slow on your feet, well, that's insignificant. If you can still move around, then you don't need to go to an old age home. In fact, the very notion is ridiculous. You'll look like a teenager hanging around those old dears. Oh dear, I don't know what to say. I'd love to stay in my own home, Lisa. I really would. But I can't move around. It's the slowness after my injury that's a botheration. Well, that's why we're here, to help you. Jonathan's not going to be happy about that. He wants to put me in an old age home. He's most insistent about it, actually. Well, how often does Jonathan visit you, Rona? He lives far away, doesn't he? Yes, he does. I barely see him. I'm lucky if I get to see him 3 times a year. Well, Rona, don't let him bully you. I've never met your son, but I will say this. This is your house, and you can stay here as long as you like with our help and intervention. It's your call. I know you love this home, so you should live here as long as you like. I'd love to die here, actually, said Rona dreamily. I really would. Thank you, dear. I'm most grateful. You have no idea how much I will appreciate your help. Within days, Rona Nettles' life had significantly changed, as me and my husband and 3 sons, Paul 12, Michael 15, and Wayne 18, all drew up a roster to take it in turns to do our bit to help Rona with her shopping, cleaning, mowing the lawn, attending to her roses. I would take down Rona's shopping list and place the shopping in her cupboards. She would sit there pointing to the goods that I had purchased. The sugar goes in that white container over there marked sugar, that's right. The cereal goes into that Tupperware jar. One day I was putting her shopping away. There was a knock at Rona's front door. Give me a moment, dear. I'll go and get that for you. To my amazement, it was an estate agent. Hello, said the very debonair man standing in the doorway, who looked every part a real estate agent. He was wearing a formal blue suit, a shining pair of pointed black shoes that had been polished so brightly you could see your reflection in them. He was neatly shaven and smelt strongly of a very aromatic aftershave that reminded me of Curus, as my son used to use it a lot. He peered at me behind a very bland pair of glasses through his beady brown eyes. He swaggered like a tall, proud tree on a windy day, with the inflated look of an eager salesman who was already seeing dollar signs in his head. For there was no doubt that Rona Nettles' house was worth a bob or two, and the estate agent's flaring nostrils were smelling that printed money even as we spoke. He gave me a warm, confident smile, exposing a Hollywood set of whiter-than-white teeth, a winning smile that certainly must have cost a fortune from an excellent cosmetic dentist. "My name is Jules Johnston. May I please come in?" he said, shaking my hand warmly. How had he done that, I wondered with annoyance. Somehow he'd masterfully manipulated his way into Rona's house. I found myself leading him into the kitchen. "Rona," I said, "this is Jules Johnston. He's an estate agent." "Hello, Mrs. Nettles," said Jules, smiling at Rona brightly, with a presumptuous familiarity that gave you the distinct impression he'd known her personally all his life. "Your son, Jonathan Nettles, gave me a call." He reached for the old woman's hands and gave it a firm shake. "It's very good to meet you, Mrs. Nettles. Now, if you will allow me for a few moments to assess your home, I'll be back in a tick," he said. Then he was gone faster than lightning, sauntering through one room after another with a pen and paper, studying every space with a judicious look. "What's that about?" asked Rona, raising a brow. "I'm sorry, Rona. He masterfully manipulated his way into your home. I think your son Jonathan gave him a call, asked him to value your home." Rona sighed. "It's not your fault, dear. The man wormed his way in here masterfully. These professional types, they've got their sales figures down to a fine art." In what seemed like minutes, Jules the estate agent came sauntering into the kitchen with a huge beam on his face. Rona and I were seated around the kitchen table, drinking tea together. "I'm very pleased to inform you, Rona, that your house is in remarkably good condition. Sorry, I hope you don't mind me calling you by your first name." "No, that's fine." "I think with a few minor details attended to quickly, you could have your home on the market by next weekend. I notice some of your bulbs need replacing. I think that many of the skirting boards should be repainted with some white enamel. Then there is a tap in the cloakroom that needs replacing. There are a couple of floorboards in the upstairs room that should be re-sanded and polished. Other than that, we're very good to go. You say the word. I know a fabulous maintenance man that can attend to the jobs for you at a fair price, and then we're ready to stage your home." "But I'm not selling," said Rona. "Not at the moment, that is." The estate agent's warm smile turned down into an upside-down frown. "But I don't understand," he said, looking genuinely perplexed. "Your son Jonathan was most insistent you needed to sell immediately. The good news is that your house will be snapped up very quickly, should fetch a decent sum. I took the liberty," he said, fidgeting around in his briefcase and bringing out some brochures of retirement homes. He continued rather bashfully, "I took the liberty, as I was saying, of picking these up for you. Your son Jonathan requested for you to look at them, so you can decide which place tickles your boat, so to speak." The estate agent straightened, took in a deep breath, handed Rona all the leaflets and his business cards. "Just give me a call as soon as you decide to sell. I'll be here in a heartbeat. I'll show myself out, shall I?" "Yes, please do." Rona sighed. "My son Jonathan, he's not easily fobbed off. He's hankering for me to sell this place." "Well, it's entirely up to you, Rona, but I think you should stay here as long as you can. This is your home, after all. We have a perfect roster that is working efficiently for you." That evening at about 6 o'clock, as I was bustling over the range preparing shepherd's pie for dinner, the bell of the front door rang. "Michael, will you answer that, sweetheart?" I heard my son talking to someone in the doorway. I heard him say, "Yes, she is home. Follow me." My son escorted a man in his late 50s into the kitchen. The expression on his face was enraged. "Are you Mrs. Forrester?" "I'm her, yes." "Who do you think you are, telling my mother not to sell her property? My mother is an elderly woman in her 80s. She needs to move into an old age home forthwith. It's come to my attention that you are interfering into her personal business. The estate agent informed me that my mother has decided not to sell, and I gather it's down to you, her interfering neighbour. I know about your type, Mrs. Forrester. There's always one busybody in every single neighbourhood. Just my mother's luck to end up living next door to one. The nauseating type who puts her nose where it doesn't belong." "Look, Mr. Nettles, you're Jonathan, I take it. Your mum's told me an awful lot about you, and your eagerness for her to sell her home. I assure you your mother doesn't want to sell yet. She can still manage around that house. Yes, she has slowed down after her ankle injury. But that's where we help her, with all her shopping, her housework and her yard work, and she's managing very well with our intervention." "Living on her own is not a good idea, but you're actively encouraging her to stay in a home where she could potentially have an accident." "Well, accidents can happen anywhere, Mr. Nettles, even in retirement and old age homes. I'll have you know your mother is still managing very well on her own. Besides, she adores her house. She wants to stay there as long as possible, and why not? If she had her way, she would die on that property." "I don't want her to stay there. I want her to move at once. It'll make me rest a lot better. I told you she's getting old." "That's rich coming from you, Mr. Nettles, if you don't mind my saying so. From a son who visits his mother 3 times a year if she's lucky. I happen to live next door to your mother. I'm her next-door neighbour. I've known Rona for over 20 years now. We're incredibly good friends. We've always helped each other out in this neighbourhood. If your mother wants to move into an old age home, she'll do so in her own time and at her own pace, thank you very much. It's not for you to bully your mother around. She is still of sound mind, and she can make her own decisions. Why don't you speak to her about it yourself if it bothers you so much? I think you'll find she's made up her own mind." "You know I can't speak to my mother. She's as stubborn as an ox, refusing to sell, simply because you're helping her out. If you didn't interfere so much, none of this would be happening. Look, Mr. Nettles, I appreciate your coming around, but I'd thank you to leave right now. I'm about to serve up dinner for the family." Jonathan Nettles sniggered. "People like you, Mrs. Forrester, make me sick to the stomach. Interfering busybody. That's what you are," he said, storming out of the house like a belligerent bull whose feathers had been well and truly ruffled. "What was all that drama about?" asked my husband, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "I could see the man sauntering off, as if he had a bee in his bonnet about something. What's pickled his cucumber?" "Unfortunately, he's rather upset that we're all helping Rona manage her life with the jobs we're doing for her. He doesn't like our interference one bit. He wants to send her off to an old-age home as soon as possible. A place like that will finish his mother off in days. He knows it." "Maybe that's the whole point, Mum," said my oldest son, Wayne. "You know Mrs. Nettles. She's not short of a bob or two. Her house will fetch a pretty penny. Maybe he's after her nest egg." "That's a bit presumptuous of you, Wayne. I'm sure Jonathan means well, and underneath it all he has his mother's interests at heart, surely. Perhaps he's worried about his mother having another nasty fall. It does happen when people get older. But we have Rona's back, and she can always call us on her cell if she's having trouble." My husband raised a brow. "I seem to recall Rona once mentioning Jonathan having a gambling problem. Don't you remember? You don't think that's why he's desperate to sell for his mother? So that he can get his hands on some of that much-needed cash for himself to cover some of his debts?" "I'm sure you're barking up the wrong tree," I said to my husband. "That happened an awfully long time ago, you know. Rona hasn't mentioned Jonathan having problems in recent years with gambling. But I do remember her telling me once that she told Jonathan that she would never give him a penny to cover his gambling debts, but she would pay for him to get therapy should the need arise. Maybe he did. You never know." "You really think a leopard can change its spots?" said my husband cynically. "I think Wayne's got a very good point. I would hedge a bet he's after his mother's money." "Give the poor man a break. He might be a little aggressive, but I'm sure his heart is in the right place." My son Wayne's story. It was later on a Saturday night. Possibly it's more appropriate to actually say super early on a Sunday morning. I was riding back on my bicycle from visiting my girlfriend Sassy, who lived a few blocks away. I was really quite shocked how late in the evening it had become. Me and my girlfriend's brother Toby had prepared a delicious barbecue together. We'd sat down to drink a cold six-pack, to eat sizzling beef burgers, salad and rolls, and of course to reminisce. The time had drifted away so fast, as it invariably always does when you're having a good time. I was visibly shocked that it was already 1 o'clock in the morning, so I knew I'd better be making tracks home. At 18 years old, my parents had given me a measure of independence, which I'm afraid I exploited with very little trouble. They knew at weekends that I was rather inclined to get back late, but this was overdoing it, as I had studying to do. I knew in the morning I would be so bushed I'd never get around to doing any of my studies. I was secretly chastising myself for being so badly disciplined. I had sworn to myself I would leave the barbecue no later than 10 o'clock that evening. And look at me, I was late again. This wasn't the first time a good time had so eagerly expropriated my reason and common sense, where my best intentions had been seduced, wilfully led astray, flying out of the window like a hot air balloon, floating away into the ether. If I carried on like this any more, with such a reckless insouciance, I would not acquire the grades I needed for my university degree. It would serve me right if I didn't make the grade, I told myself sternly, as I mulled over my apathy, seriously reprimanding myself. I sailed down the streets on my bicycle, barely paying much attention to how dark it was, as I was wearing a headlamp on my head. My bicycle light lit up my path clearly, at least enough for me to focus on the long ribbon of asphalt. As I was cycling, I suddenly became assiduously aware that everything was cloaked in a conspicuous silence that was so tangible it grabbed my attention as consummately as having a bucket of ice-cold water thrown over my head. When I'd been outside only moments before drinking beers over the fire pit at my girlfriend's home, We could hear the crickets and frogs very clearly, but now there was no background noise at all. I cannot lie, it made me feel ever so slightly on edge. I could feel prickles of unease rolling down my spine. The streets were quiet. The lights of the residential homes basked in darkness. Everything was disturbingly soundless. Quite frankly, without the whishing sound of my wheels on tarmac and my feet pushing the pedals swiftly, I think the sound of the silence would have been significantly more discomposing. I'm afraid the tenebrous black velvety night was not generous tonight in her bountiful showing, for the crescent moon, along with the clusters of silvery stars, were hidden and obscured behind a rising mist that quickly descended over our street like a morose, sinisterous, ghostly veil. As I was cycling past Mrs. Nettles' home, I stopped dead in my tracks. The lights in her kitchen were on. I knew instinctively that something was terribly wrong. A sense of dreadful foreboding overcame me. My guts recoiled. Mrs. Nettles made no secret of the fact that she retired to bed early every night. So what was she doing up at this ungodly hour of the morning? Something was distinctly off. I could feel it in my bones. So it was with great trepidation I placed my bicycle against a street lamp and made my way around to the back of Mrs. Nettles' home, where the light was on. I had a sinking feeling in my guts. I knew Mrs. Nettles had a very naughty habit of keeping her kitchen door unlocked at night, something that my family had always warned her about. Could someone have broken in, held her to ransom, I wondered. Then I heard the voice. "Where is your money?" with a pronounced French accent. "Where is your money?" I surreptitiously grabbed a sizable trowel from the yard, cautiously making my way to the back door, assertively pushing it open. It barely even creaked. For a while both Mrs. Nettles and the tall stranger in the kitchen were completely oblivious to my presence. What I saw sent a huge shiver nosediving down my spine. A man wearing a balaclava over his head, dressed in distinctive black clothing and gloves, was threatening Mrs. Nettles with what appeared to be an iron bar. He had tied the woman by her hands and legs to the chair with rope. He appeared to be demanding money. "I don't keep any money in the house," said Mrs. Nettles, tears pouring down her face. The woman was so terrified, petrified even. I realized to my horror that this doggedly determined burglar had recklessly broken all Mrs. Nettles' periwinkle china that she valued so much from her oakwood dresser. It was lying all over the kitchen, broken into hundreds of thousands of pieces. He was going around her entire kitchen, slamming his metal pole onto everything, possibly to intimidate and steamroll the poor elderly woman. "I want money now, or I will kill you." "I could write you a cash cheque," said Mrs. Nettles, "but I don't keep money in the house." I didn't think of my own safety, as the anger I felt for poor Mrs. Nettles being held to ransom by this violent thug was all-consuming. "What's going on here?" I said as I entered the kitchen, holding the large spade in my hand. I was lucky because I'm big for my age. I'm 6 foot tall, very broad in the shoulders, so I can easily stand up for myself. I've also done martial arts and judo. I could see the angry brown eyes in the balaclava seem to grow frightened. To my amazement, the man ran away from me, out of the kitchen door, from the backyard to the front, down the long ribbon of asphalt, directly towards the woods. I began to give him chase. I was quite impressed, for he ran fast until he reached the hiking trail, still carrying the metal pole in his hands, while I'd long since relinquished the heavy spade I'd been carrying, as it would seriously have impeded my running. I was tenaciously determined to catch up with this ghastly thug, take him down with a couple of heavy punches. Who did he think he was, scaring a poor elderly lady half to death like this? I was grateful that I had the edge on this man, not only with my speed, but with the light of my headlamp still on. I dashed into the woods, trailing behind him. The tall silhouettes of the Douglas firs, western hemlocks, red cedars, western yews and black cottonwoods rose up into the sky, some tall, majestic, others shorter and dense with foliage. But as a wind had begun to blow, the boughs of the trees began to jiggle, and in the dim twilight It was seriously menacing, but I made sure my attention was not diverted. I needed to catch this thug. I lunged towards the man, grabbing his sweater, pulling him towards me, punching him in the chest several times. He winced in pain, screaming, "Please stop! Please stop! You're hurting me! Please stop! You're hurting me!" I successfully threw him onto the earthen ground, while the metal pole he'd been carrying simply slipped out of his hands like butter. I was now on top of him, with my buttocks resting on his chest. He was trying to fight back, but my strength overpowered him. He was screaming again for me to stop. "Please, stop! I told you, you're hurting me! Stop!" His French accent had morphed into a pronounced southern drawl, so the French accent had been a ruse all along. With one swift tug, I pulled off the man's balaclava. I stared at him in shock. It was Jonathan Nettles, Rona Nettles' son. But instead of seeing his piercing blue eyes, his eyes were brown. Of course, I thought, he'd changed his eye colour with contact lenses. It was a clever trick you could apply nowadays. "What the hell, Jonathan? What are you doing scaring the life out of your poor mother there? Breaking all her china, demanding money. You saw how petrified she was. What the heck were you doing? To your own mother, for goodness sake. You can't get lower than that." "I'm in trouble," said Jonathan. "I have a $200,000 gambling debt on my back, which I have to pay in a month's time. You know what these sharks are like if you don't pay them back. I'm already paying them $50,000 in interest. Downright robbery. They've already threatened to kill me if I don't pay up, and I know they mean business. I got scared. I had to do something. I thought if I could scare my mother significantly, she would agree to sell the house as soon as possible. That's my only hope of procuring some cash. So it's all right to go scaring your mother half to death just so you can get your hands on her money. Have you any idea how warped that sounds? No, it's not all right, I admit, but I was running out of options thanks to your interfering mother. I knew I could pull off a French accent, cover myself in black, use brown contact lenses. She'd never recognise me. I wanted to scare her so much, so she'd sell at once. I knew it would work. Have you thought about just asking your mother for financial help, rather than behaving like a juvenile delinquent? If I tell her I'm gambling, she'll put her foot down. She refuses to support my gambling addiction. She's always made that clear to me. I can't say I blame her. Gambling is a bottomless pit. Why do you do it, mate? Surely you know these things are rigged. They're not designed to help you win, to make you rich. Everyone knows that, surely. Did you hear that? Said Jonathan suddenly, his attention diverted by something he'd heard in the woods. What? I said. That noise! Listen! I could hear what I can only describe as thundering feet moving towards us at one hell of a pace. As it neared its approach, it was like the forest floor heaved and groaned under its sizable weight. I could hear substantial tree limbs snapping like mere twigs, crashing to the ground, falling with a mighty thud, as if a tree feller was felling trees. Something of incredible girth and weight was effortlessly bolting through the thicket, pulverizing everything in its wake, like an elephant in a china shop, languidly tearing every obstruction apart. "What the heck is that?" I said, looking at Jonathan with my eyes as wide as saucers, my jaws hanging open wide like a Venus flytrap. Then the forest was infused with the most repugnant smell that was like rotten garbage, sweat, sulphur, decomposing flesh, a smell so atrocious, so vile, that my eyes began to burn, and the desire to vomit and hurl became intense and overwhelming. For the both of us, the calamitous noise was so intimidating, so threatening, so pretentious. It felt as if we were both ensnared in a fortuitous accident scene, upon which we were powerless to change the sequence of events. Almost as if they had been commandeered from our natural ability to take any control. or to change its aftermath. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion, as it invariably always does in any ineffectual life and death situation. In reality, things were going speedily. I wanted to tell Jonathan to run, but I couldn't even get myself to obey the orders of my own adrenaline that was coursing through my veins, instinctively perceiving that a threatening danger was looming ever closer. Even at this stage, the thunderous crashing and thrashing noise in the forest that sounded like 1,000 bison beating up the ground with their hefty hooves was so frightening. I felt as if I was watching the scene unfolding before my eyes in a detached way, like a movie at a cinema. I beheld the branches of a cottonwood tree beginning to shake ominously, as if some thing was deliberately oscillating them. For a moment I sensed eyes on me, as if I was being scrutinized by a pair of mean eyes. And then I saw him. Standing yards away from us was a formidable giant, covered in long flowing black hair, blacker than the night, darker than coal. He was the most terrifying creature that I have ever beheld, much like something that the gates of hell would offer or conjure up to you, or a monster from your darkest, most terrifying nightmares. I knew at once what it was. There was no mistake in my mind. No, none at all. It was a Bigfoot. This Titanic-sized creature stood up on 2 powerful feet, tall, lofty, majestic, fearsome, with tree-trunk legs, an ape-like face, bright red, glowing, menacious eyes that beheld no compassion or kindness, no hint of humanity. "Run!" I cried out to Jonathan. "Run! He's going to kill us!" I do not know how I sprung to life, but I did like a deer. As my limbs gained traction, my feet bounded efficiently through the wood grove, but I ran with a speed I have never been able to replicate since. Believe me, if I could run like that again, I would be winning first prizes in marathons every time. It was fear that pounded through my blood that gave me this marvellous fighting edge. I was glad to see Jonathan running beside me, as he seemed to have found this magic elixir that gave us an edge over the creature that could run like a cheetah. I could see his humongous dark form behind us with his overlong arms reaching out to grab Jonathan, but he missed him narrowly by a hair's breadth. If he had grabbed Jonathan, I do not doubt he would be dead, without a question in my mind. It seemed that luck had smiled upon us. "Run faster!" I screamed. "Run faster!" We ran down the asphalt road with the creature hot upon our trail. I could hear his heavy breathing. "To your mother's house!" I screamed, knowing that her kitchen door would still be unlocked. To this day I still ponder how we managed to make it to Mrs. Nettles' house, but we did. We raced into that kitchen, slamming the kitchen door shut behind us. Mrs. Nettle was still tied to the chair, so I ran over to her and untied her, while Jonathan raced around the house, securing doors and windows. "What's going on?" said Mrs. Nettles, looking at her son in horror. "Oh, my word, it was you, Jonathan! You tied me up! You scared me half to death! How could you do that to your own mother? Why? Why would you do such a dreadful thing?" "I'm sorry, Mum, but forget about that now. There's something much more terrible going on in your yard. Something dangerous wants to kill us. It almost killed me moments ago." "What?" asked Mrs. Nettles, looking horrified. What? What are you talking about? What's going on? I don't understand." "An angry Bigfoot," I told her. He's out there. He's wandering around your backyard. He might try and get into your house." The creature was running around Mrs. Nettles' house, peering through the windows, banging on the wooden rafters. We could hear him grunting and growling. Oh my God!" gasped Mrs. Nettles. "The thing, it's enormous! It's a Bigfoot! I can't believe it! I can't believe it! I can't believe it didn't kill the both of you! How did you manage to outrun that awful thing?" she said, grabbing us both in her arms, thankful that we were both alive. "Oh, my goodness! I could have lost you, Jonathan! That thing! He's a demon! We've got to kill him right now!" Mrs. Nettles quickly grabbed a rifle from the upstairs cupboard and loaded it without flinching. We were powerless to stop her. With a steely confidence and tenacious determination, she opened the back door. The creature was standing yards away from her. A tall, dark silhouette with bright red blazing eyes came bounding towards her. But she began firing at the creature confidently, hitting him in the arm several times. I heard a loud, painful yelp. The creature turned around and glided away, going back from whence he'd come. I never felt more relieved in my entire life to see the back of anything before. I was astonished by Mrs. Nettles' bravery, but she was overwhelmed that me and Jonathan were all right, that we were unharmed. It seemed like Jonathan's former actions of holding her to ransom by tying her up to the chair had become like water off a duck's back, compared to encountering this monstrous beast that made everything else pale into insignificance. So all was forgiven and forgotten. I'm glad to inform you that Mrs. Nettles forgave Jonathan, paid off his gambling debt, insisting that in return he received help against his addiction. She continued to live in her home until the grand old age of 92, where one night she passed away peacefully in her sleep. What a beautiful way to go. We never saw the Bigfoot again, but he did get hit by one of Mrs. Nettles' bullets, as a trail of blood was traced back to that woodgrove. Whether the creature lived or died, we will never know, but I'm glad to say we never saw it again, for it was evil to its core. The hatred it beheld towards us was tangible. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.